Aloha, inspired moneymakers. Welcome to episode 10 of the Inspired Money live stream series. It's titled Money Talks, Conversations on Wealth and Legacy. I don't know about you, but when I hear the word legacy, I think about money or property left to someone in a will. That could be it. Or maybe it's about leaving a long-lasting impact after someone passes away. Like many things, when it comes to money, it can be complicated. It's about family dynamics, different generational beliefs, even the simple basics of personal finance, whether it's there or lacking. School just doesn't tend to teach us much about this stuff. And that's why I want to make this episode special. We're going beyond the numbers, beyond the bank statements, and into the very soul of what it means to be wealthy. This episode is for you whether you have $1 million or if you aspire to grow your money to build a future legacy. If you've been following this inspired money journey, perhaps you're seeing that I like the unexpected. Last week, we had Arrowverse star Katie Cassidy, Zen Habits, Leo Babauta, a feng shui expert, and an award-winning architect talking about home design. Today, we've gathered an extraordinary panel of thought leaders from different disciplines, each a luminary in their own right. So sit back, grab your notebooks, and prepare to redefine your definition of success. Because today, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about the impact of financial choices on your family, your community, and yes, even the world. So let's get inspired to make money that matters. I'm excited to welcome in our esteemed panelists. Let's begin with Heather Winslow-Walker. She hails from Vanguard, one of the world's most respected investment management companies, a 22-year veteran in legacy planning, specializing in assisting ultra-high net worth, multi-generational families. Heather's expertise in psychology, business, and education helps her to facilitate discussions around complex wealth transfer and resolve intricate family issues. Heather, welcome. What's your favorite thing about working with families? Oh, I think you're muted.
I think that I have always aspired to the people side of things. And so I love that I can bring that human element into an industry, as you said, that is mostly numbers oriented, and how we can help people to prepare for the future is really one of my things to do.
I suspect we're going to be talking a lot about the complexities that people bring to the money conversation. Dr. John Demartini is an author, speaker, behavioral expert known for his groundbreaking work in human potential and personal development. He studied over 30,000 books and synthesizes the knowledge and wisdom from the greatest minds through history. Dr. John, you live on the world, the largest, oldest, and perhaps only residential cruise ship. Where in the world are you right now?
I just left Bermuda and I'm on my way to Nassau right now. We just sailed out just about an hour ago. So we're in the ocean heading towards Nassau, Bahama.
Very cool. I had grandparents who at one time lived in Bermuda, so I have fond memories of that island.
Great space.
We have Daniele my Italian is bad. Daniele Bolelli.
Hey, that was actually really good.
Grazie.
Very nicely done.
He's an author, professor, martial artist, and creator of the acclaimed History on Fire podcast. I look forward to getting his views on wealth and legacy through his brilliant lens of history, philosophy, personal growth, and martial arts. Love your podcast.
Thank you so much.
Daniele, what's it like to be on the Joe Rogan Experience?
That was bizarre, even the way it came into being, the whole thing, because it was the first time I was on Rogan's podcast was 2011, and I didn't even know what podcasts were. And I got this call because I'd written a book at the time, and somebody was working on trying to publicize it a little, told me, hey, I got you on Rogan's podcast. And I was like, so I got there and I was like, what are we doing here, podcast? And they were like, it's kind of like a radio, but you can cuss. I was like, okay, I can do this.
And you stayed with podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, it became one of the things because it was such a deep dive right off the bat, like ending up on, he has such a huge audience. And I had no idea about the potential of the medium. And so then I spent the next 3 days just replying to people's emails of people comment, and I realized, wow, a lot of people listen to this stuff. And, you know, his audience liked me, he got along with me, so then he invited me a bunch more times. And then because of that, it kind of seemed stupid not to jump into it and start using that media. I've always been interested in storytelling, but I was like, okay, this is a new way that I always thought of storytelling as writing. And I'm like, okay, this is another way to get to communicate, to get the message across, so I had fun because the door was cracked open for me in podcasting already halfway. I was like, might as well go for it.
I like that you started big.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, and also that was a useful reminder of the power of luck, right? Because you can work hard, you can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, sometimes you catch lucky breaks, and if you're not ready to use them, well, the luck is pointless. But also, if you don't have the luck, it's gonna be considerably harder to do what you wanna do. So that was a useful reminder.
I'll keep my lucky rabbit's foot nearby. Our fourth panelist is another podcaster, Caleb Silver, editor-in-chief of Investopedia, a prominent resource for investors and financial enthusiasts. His expertise in finance, markets, and economic trends make him a leading voice in the world of investment and finance. Caleb, I love Investopedia.com as a resource. You've created Emmy-nominated financial content for over 2 decades. What was it like being senior producer for The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer?
Yeah, I feel incredibly boring compared to these guests, but I did have a lot of fun. I had 10 years at CNN, and I was there for the launch of The Situation Room. I was a senior producer helping bring that show to life. It was happening right as Katrina was happening. So literally 2 days before, I was on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico learning how they evacuated, and then they had to evacuate it. But The Situation Room was very cool and very different because we were bringing live feeds to the viewer as we saw them. There was really no filter between us and what was happening. And because it was Katrina and CNN was all over it, real-time news, we were doing instantaneous sort of live feed journalism, trying to figure it out on the fly, very raw. And that was a great experience. Wolf Blitzer is one of the greatest broadcasters I've ever met and one of the nicest people I ever met. Super grateful for my time at CNN. And I also had a good 8 years at Bloomberg, but it's been a real privilege to be the editor-in-chief of Investopedia for the last 8 years as well.
Historic. Well, I hope that the viewers and listeners are as excited as I am about this panel. It really is a multidisciplinary panel to discuss wealth and legacy. So let's jump right into segment 1. Wealth is not merely a stack of coins or a bank statement. It's a multidimensional construct that encompasses financial, intellectual, social, and even spiritual capital. But what ethical compass guides this accumulation? John Locke, the seminal philosopher, posits that true ownership comes from utility, fairness, and labor. Yet, in our digital age, where money neither spoils nor is finite, Locke's principles are put to the test. The line between ambition and greed blurs when wealth becomes the sole focus, overshadowing compassion and societal well-being. It's not just about having more, it's about the implications of that more. Does it serve just you, or does it serve humanity? Philosophers like Peter Singer remind us that compassion isn't a weakness, it's a cornerstone of collective survival. So as you navigate your financial journey, remember, wealth isn't just about accumulation, it's about alignment. Alignment with ethics, with society, and most importantly, with your own multidimensional self. So as a financial advisor, I see 4 pillars of wealth being financial, intellectual, social, and spiritual. Dr. John, what's your view on this well-rounded understanding of wealth?
Well, I love that little video clip. First of all, that was lovely and nicely produced. Every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values that they live their life by. When they are living congruently according to their highest values, they're more objective. They bring the blood glucose and oxygen to their forebrain and to the executive center, and they're self-governed. When they do, they have a higher probability of having a sustainable fair exchange mentality and mindset because they're global in their thinking. They're not thinking of just themselves. They're thinking of their employees, they're thinking of their customers, they're thinking about the society, the ecology, etc. when they are not living by their highest values and they're in lower priorities and they're not delegating those and they're stuck in those, they activate the blood glucose and oxygen to their amygdala. And the amygdala is designed to try to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And it awakens pride. It awakens, you might say, the seeking of immediate gratification, the greed factor. And they're more vulnerable to have subjective bias interpretations of their reality and their assessments and in their actions. Their perception, decisions, and actions are skewed. And they have a higher probability of trying to get something for nothing instead of giving something and getting something in fair exchange. Sustainable fair exchange is what leads to consistent desire to grow business and wealth. If we're narcissistic, we try to get something for nothing. We don't listen to our customers and our employees. If we're altruistic, we sacrifice for other people, and sacrificing others for us or sacrificing us for others doesn't lead to sustainable fair exchange. So we have a rocky vicissitude approach to business management, and it eventually backfires. So it forces us with symptomatology to guide us back into the authentic path where we're most objective, most clear about a mission of service and something that's a win-win to ourselves and other people. So that little video is a perfect example of the secrets behind the mastery of wealth building.
Daniele, are there lessons from history that can guide us on how we define wealth or mistakes to avoid?
I think that's another thing that's interesting when you look at different cultures and how different cultures approach it, because the variety of human experience in that regard is hard to even underestimate. There's so much out there. There are just so many cultural priorities that don't really necessarily speak to one another. So it's interesting because you can learn from realizing that the cultural context you are born in is not mandated from heaven, is not the only way to be. There are a zillion ways that human beings have structured society, have conceived of wealth. So looking at those different options, to me, is fascinating. Like, for example, if you have wealth measured in numbers, something just as basic as that. If you have wealth measured in numbers, there's no limit to it, right? Because you can always add numbers to your bank account. So it's built into the system, the notion that there's never a stopping point. You're always going to grow constantly. And that makes sense within a context in which wealth is measured in numbers. If wealth is measured just in what you can use, clearly is a very different dynamic. Because now, think of like something as basic as hunters-gatherers have the same instincts we have. They are not any more violent or peaceful by nature, but like the context of their life, they would fight about many things. But possessions weren't one of them, because being nomadic meant you have to carry on your back everything you own. And last thing I want is to take somebody else's stuff, because now I have to carry it. And it's like, no, I'm only going to take the stuff that I need from, which is fairly minimal. So in that context, an idea of wealth like the way we would have makes no sense. And to me, I find it fascinating, not necessarily because I believe one system is better or worse. It's not so much about pointing fingers and judging who's right and wrong. It's interesting to see how human beings have approached the subject. And depending on the culture and the time in history in which they were born, that understanding of what wealth means may change radically.
Heather, this concept of ethical wealth, one where the means of accumulation are as important as the ends, how does this apply to the mass affluent with, say, $500,000 versus high net worth? And I'm not even sure what high net worth is these days. Is $1 million enough? Is it 5 million? Is it 15 million?
It's an interesting question. I think that, there are different definitions of high net worth depending on the company that you might be in or how they define it. Sometimes it can be such a barrier as 5 million and above that you're considered high net worth. But I think that thinking about that from mass affluent versus ultra high net worth, what it really gets down to is thinking through the purpose of the wealth for the family. And I'll play off what Dr. John was saying, that the values of a family are really the cornerstone when you're planning for that legacy. And that that can cross any wealth level. So certainly while there might be more buying power, depending on the amount of wealth you have, the very cornerstone of those values, which drives your vision and the purpose of the wealth, is universal across wealth level.
And I want to ask Caleb, because you have your finger on the pulse of financial trends. How do you think that the digital age is reshaping our approach to wealth and our desire to impact causes that mean something to us?
I think it's pretty scattered if you look at it. And if you look at social media and you have kids or teenagers like I do, I got teenagers, then wealth is very drippy. It's very splashy. It's, people living their best life or wearing the newest and the latest. And it's very about that, not about accumulation of wealth or the ability to build wealth to have financial freedom and build a legacy. One thing I find really fascinating is one of the most popular questions we got on Investopedia, believe it or not, is what is money? And I don't think people are actually asking that in the simplest way. I think they're asking that in a metaphysical way. And I think the digital age has brought that about. When you have cryptocurrency, when you have buy now, pay later, when you have the ability to just put your phone down and pay for something, when you have all of these things that disassociate you from the way a lot of us grew up with money, or a lot of the ways past generations grew up and evolved with money, it becomes very different, a very different notion of what money and wealth is. But I love this question because I ask it to all the financial advisors and the big investors that I talk to. Define money, define wealth. And for many people, who deal with clients, especially, wealth is really the ability to afford the life you want to live. How much does it cost to be you? How much does it cost to be the you want to be? The wealth is the ultimate tool to create that scenario in an evolved type of way. Of course, it appears all over the place in social media, TV, movies, in different facets. But when I think about planning, legacy, and estate building and building generational wealth, it is really the answer to that question. How much does it cost to be the you want to be, you and your family?
Yeah, we can talk all day about defining money. And I love that it's something that is always evolving, especially with the advent of digital currencies. Let's move to segment 2. The preservation of multi-generational wealth is a dance between numbers and human connection. It starts with inclusion, bringing every family member into the financial fold. This is not just a spreadsheet exercise. It's a dialogue that bridges generations. Research shows that only 30% of families successfully pass on their wealth. Why? Because a well-crafted financial plan is not enough. You need a legal framework. Think estate planning and trusts to safeguard that wealth. But here's the kicker. The younger generation must be educated, not just handed a portfolio. They need to understand the mechanics of investments, the nuances of tax planning, and the importance of adhering to best practices. This isn't a one-and-done deal. It's an evolving strategy that requires regular audits and expert consultation. So as you build your legacy, keep this in mind. Wealth isn't just about what you leave behind, but how you prepare the next generation to handle it. Just a quick reminder to the panelists, you don't have to wait for me to call on you. Feel free to chime in at any time. But with that said, I do want to ask Heather, is it true that less than a third of families successfully pass on their wealth? Can you talk a little bit about family preparedness in legacy planning?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And that family preparedness concept is right up our alley. There's a movement going on now called Wealth 3.0, which is really starting to question that original research that happened, saying that only a third of the families would be successful in passing on the wealth. And so there is some debate about that and some call for new research on that. What I will say is that family preparedness issue is such a critical issue, even more than what we might call family legacy. Family legacy is something that you want to pass across generations. Much of what, examples that were given, maybe it's property or wealth or philanthropy that you want to last across generations. But this family preparedness concept meaning that the family is working together to get prepared as parents age. And how do we begin to do that logistically, tactically? How do we begin to think about what we want from this person to last across generations? And just to the spirit of what we're talking about, it's very often not the wealth that they want to last. It's more about those the human capital that they brought to the table, their values that they brought to the table, wanting families to prosper across generations from an education standpoint, for example. So really, really critical for all families, no matter what your wealth level, to get prepared in that way. And sometimes that's a really tactical exercise, much more than the philosophical. Sometimes it's just things like making sure all of your documents are in place, making sure that those estate documents have been crafted. But the big key here is that people don't often communicate within the family. So we spend a ton of time shaping the technical, growing the assets, putting the estate plans in place. And all of that is crucial to do. But families often forget about that human side of just sharing the plan, making sure that people are on board, talking about how we can support each other as we go through these life stages together. So I love that, Andy, that you brought up that concept of family preparedness, something that we do at Vanguard and are very focused on with our clients.
Caleb, you're working with advisors right now. To what extent do you involve like your teenagers, for example?
Yeah, I'm unpacking our family plan and trusts and wills right now. My parents, who are older, obviously, I'm dealing with that. And I am one of those people that's super transparent about it with my kids, about all things wealth, about all things money. I want them to understand it. In my family, even though I grew up, my dad's an investment banker, I grew up around a lot of business and around a lot of the conversations about money on a broader scale. Personal family finances were not something that we talked about. And we went through some things that caused me to be pretty risk averse, when I was growing up and starting to earn an income. So we talk about it all the time with my kids at the dinner table, not just what the plan is, but where does the money come from? What do things actually cost? What are our goals as a family? What does wealth actually mean to us? They have a pretty good idea of how much we make and how hard we work to make it, but also what is it for? What's the point of it? So it's a very open conversation with us because I didn't have that growing up. And what did I end up getting? A lot of surprises and a lot of hard knocks in learning those lessons. So now as the editor in chief, it's my job to talk about it to the world, but I make sure that I practice what I preach and bring it home to the kitchen table. And I think my kids are grateful for it. I think they have a better understanding of it. And I think it's a humbling, but also something that they understand is something they're going to keep learning their whole life. But I want them to have that good foundation and have a very good understanding of where we are as a family and where we intend to be.
It seems like money conversations are usually not that open, not only with our friends, but even within our own families at the dinner table. John, you talk about values. Like, how can families align their values when planning for multi-generational financial success?
Can I share a story related to that?
Absolutely.
I'm 9 years old and I go to my dad and I said, Dad, I want to buy a baseball and a glove and a bat. He said, fantastic. I said, I need to earn some money. He said, well, have you mowed the yard? Yep. You edged the yard? Yep. You clipped the hedges? Yep. You swept the sidewalk in the garage? Yep. You done all the shale? Yep. You cleaned out the flower beds? Yep. You shined my shoes? Yep. He says, son, I don't have anything else to do. If you want to earn some money, you're going to have to go to people in the neighborhood and see what you can do to find something to be of service. So I went down the street and I knocked on a door and Mrs. Evans said, yes, how can I help you? And I said, I'd like to know if I could take your yard. It needs some trimming and stuff. Can I do it? So I ended up working for that. And I spent the whole day getting bee stung and sunburn and blisters on my hand. And I did that whole yard because my dad taught me how to do a yard. I came back with some money and he said, I see you bought your baseball glove and bat and you earned some money. What'd you do? And I said, I've did this yard and I did what you told me. Went to the neighbors and did it. He said, what equipment did you use? I said, the equipment in the garage. He said, son, I have to charge you for that. I said, what do you mean charge me for that? He said, yeah, you owe me $7.50. And I said, well, I've already spent it on my glove and bat. He said, well, that's not how it works in the world. You got to set aside the money for your cost of depreciation, and you got to go and pay some taxes and this and that. And that's not how it works. So I owed him money. I had to do a bunch of other yards to do it, and that cut down my profit. So one day a guy was coming along with a bicycle, and he saw me working in the yard, and I said, would you like to earn some money today? And he said, yeah. Well, in a short period of time, I had 9 people working for me when I was 9 years old, and had 3 teams going around doing all the yards. And I made about $45 after everybody was paid and everything else. I was doing pretty good. And I bought my bicycle and bought my golf clubs and all this stuff. And my dad said, well, now I notice you're not saving any money. I'm going to buy you a coin collection set, and you need to learn to save some of that, and a piggy bank to save it, which I still have in my office today, the original piggy bank from 1963 with the original coins in it. And I've never opened it up, because he never gave me a way of opening it up, to think long term. Then he said, now I got one more thing to teach you, young man. I said, yes, Dad. Every time he talked to me, it was costing me. He says, I want to teach you what it's like to be free. And I said, what's that? He says, I'm going to start charging you $7.50 a week to live at the house to cover clothing, food, and rent. And I was a little perturbed by that, but he made me reality. And what it did is I ended up paying for that. But he says, now you've got the freedom to go anywhere on your bicycle, go golfing anytime you want. You just need to be home by 9 o'clock. You can leave at 5 in the morning. You're going to be home at 9 o'clock. And he taught me how to be independent. He prepared me for multi-generational wealth by making me understand in reality what it's cost in the real world to do it. And so it's not just sitting down and intellectually talking with it. It's making sure that people have some sort of a work ethic and an understanding, because if they don't, they'll squander money, and rags to riches to rags is inevitable. So don't make it too easy on your kids. Educate them, but also make them accountable to be able to earn money so they actually understand it. Anytime you separate the purchase of something away from the payment of something, and separate in time and space the pleasures and pains of that, you actually put people in their amygdala and don't teach them how to actually manage money. They need to understand what the real cause and effect dynamics are right there on the spot, and extract out space and time in your mind from the pleasures and pains of buying and paying. And that way they're prepared in more reality about the real dynamics of fair exchange and building wealth. That education and real grounding education has a lasting effect.
I don't know about the other panelists, but I have 3 kids, and I'm not realizing any revenue. I'm not doing things right.
You got to get an ROI on those kids. I always say, by the time you're 2, what are you doing? You're laying there and suckling on a thing. Get to work. Said, you're a slave driver.
Daniele, any historical lessons? Because there are so many cautionary lessons about human nature throughout history, but I don't know what applies to wealth or money.
I mean, I think it's in some ways a bigger conversation, because as you brought up at the beginning, that this is a conversation about wealth, but really the common thread in all of this is the conversation part, is the idea of communication. And the fact of the matter is that we often take communication for granted, but the reality is that when you look at people who are actually effective at communicating, it's not such a high percentage of the population. I'm always blown away when I see problems that come up that could have been easily solved if everybody was on the same page and everybody understood each other's priorities, why something is getting done, coming to a decision that's a collective one where we all agree that at least is a decent compromise for everybody. Because otherwise there's always this assumption that other people, it's almost the stereotype of the lady who wakes up one day and, hey, you didn't know that your husband was an axe murderer and you were married to the guy for 15 years. What happened? Well, no, never came up. We got along. He was nice to the kids and stuff. And it's a lot of the time, people don't really have meaningful conversations about what they value, what they care about, what they think and want for the future, what they think, about anything really. So the level of typical communication is so bland and superficial. then inevitably you end up with the things where like there's a generational gap where kids feel that their parents don't understand them, parents feel that their kids are spoiled and don't understand the values they grew up with. But whose fault is it? It's like you never really built a culture of communication, not in the family, let alone outside of it. And so to me, the whole discussion on wealth is a subset on the discussion of communication in general, of learning how to communicate effectively in a way where, you know, if you're a leader in any business, or even if just part of a family, of any community, part of what makes somebody a good leader is knowing how to communicate with people, making sure that you understand how they feel about a decision that's made, making sure that you take their input into consideration, making sure that whatever compromise is agreed upon, they are actually really on board on it and not just because you raised your voice. And so in that sense, I really feel that it's like a whole separate level of education. First is there's going to be communicating about wealth specific, but before you can communicate effectively about wealth, you need to communicate, period. And I see that whether looking around in my life right now or whether looking at historical example, I feel like the inability to communicate effectively is at the roots of a never-ending series of human problems and dramas that could have otherwise have easily been avoided.
Oh my gosh. Yes, we see that in like geopolitical risk. And again, it's not just money not being addressed specifically enough in school. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't get communication classes specifically either. So let's move to segment 3. Legacy planning is not just about you. It's a blueprint for generations to come. It starts with estate planning, the cornerstone that ensures your assets find their rightful place. But let's elevate it. Enter trusts. These aren't just legal constructs. They're vessels carrying your values, safeguarding assets for specific objectives, be it your grandchild's education or a family member's special needs. Now, let's talk philanthropy. Your legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's the change you make in the world. Charitable giving is not an afterthought. It's a core component. Whether it's through charitable trusts or direct bequests, your wealth can be a catalyst for societal transformation. But remember, this is not a solo endeavor. Consult with financial advisors, legal experts, and tax professionals to navigate the intricate legal and ethical landscape. And most importantly, make it a family affair. Educate the next generation, not just about wealth, but about the values that wealth can uphold. So I want to ask Heather to continue what Daniele was talking about, the importance of communication. Can you elaborate on the importance of communication within a family when it comes to financial planning and estate planning?
Yes, and I think it's really important that we've mentioned the word communication a lot here, but how do we make that really practical? And I think that often when families are thinking about communicating, particularly about money, that a lot of different feelings come up and a lot of different dynamics are feared that might come up. And really the way that I look at it and the way that we actually see this play out time and time again is communication often isn't about a ton of family dynamics. It's simply about information sharing. Okay, so if you're looking at it in the context and the way that we think about holistic wealth planning at Vanguard is almost think of it like 3 intersecting circles. Okay, so you're thinking about that investment plan, you're thinking about the estate plan that you need to have in place to be able to transfer the wealth, and then you're thinking about the family preparation plan. And that's really the angle that I come in at. And so very often as parents, including myself, we're jumping right into those legal documents and we're starting to chart out what we think our plans should be, or we're thinking about who we should name to do what. But we don't typically even ask the people that might either be receiving or responsible in the future, what their thoughts are on it. Now, I'm sensitive to the fact with communication that families often hesitate to share the amount of the wealth. And I think that that is totally out of families' discretion. But that doesn't mean that you can't start to discuss plans, even if you're not going to share the amount of the wealth. And simply asking things like, hey, we're thinking about passing this thing, whether let's just say property through generations. How would you feel about receiving that? Do you want it? What are the responsibilities associated with that? Do you feel like you can take that on? And so you can start to see how what we're calling the psychology or the communication doesn't necessarily have to be fraught with dynamics. It can simply be asking questions or sharing some simple facts or thoughts and getting that response back to help you to shape the holistic plan for the better in the future. Otherwise, what we find is when you're not doing that up front, doesn't mean it always happens, but you're at risk of making plans without making sure that you have the people in place on board with where that vision is going. So I hope that that helps to just take it a little bit more deeper and a little bit more practical.
Caleb, in your family's experience, is your financial advisor serving as the quarterback with the lawyer, the accountant, or do you have to do that? What has your experience been like?
Yeah, I have to set the wheels in motion in terms of what the overall outcome we want to have to take place. And I'm working, it's complicated because I'm here in New York. The estate I'm working with and my parents' trust is in New Mexico. State by state, as you guys know, is very different, very unique. So I'm working with a New Mexico trust lawyer. My advisor and planner are here in New York, but they know the overall scheme. I had to find that lawyer, but I brought everybody together to kind of get on the same page. So I had to do a lot of orchestrating there. Not a ton, but in order to make sure that the desired outcome is going to be met, I had to bring those people together. Now, my advisor would have been happy to recommend somebody, but like I said, they're in New York. The particular trust I'm working with right now is in another state. With my own trust and with my wife and I and our wills and our trusts, we do work with our advisor directly on that. So I have a little bit of a complicated situation, but here when I'm working on our own plan here, that is all through our advisor. And I have I'm very happy with my financial advisor and the RIA I work with because they do holistic planning. So I, of course, want them to allocate responsibly and intelligently, and I want them to make money with my money. But my financial life has become very complicated by choice over the last 30 years. I have small businesses. I produce films. I have a production company. Each one of the films I make has its own LLC. I have kids going to college. There's college planning. There's insurance. There's taxes. There's investing. So I'm really taking everything from the buffet that my advisor offers to me. And there I have complete awareness as to what's going on in my life with my wife and our family and what I'm trying to do with my parents as well.
Dr. John, how can the Demartini method be applied to help families in crafting their generational legacies?
Well, the Demartini method is a series of very concise questions to help people who are having you might say, differences of opinion and conflicts, resolve those conflicts and have more reflective awareness and appreciation for each other because, every human being has a unique set of values. It's fingerprint specific. And when money comes in, they spend their money according to the hierarchy of their values. The hierarchy of their values dictates their financial destiny. And if you have a high value on raising kids, your money's going to go to the kids. If you have a high value on asset accumulation, it's going to go to that. It has to travel, it goes there. And so when you're actually doing estate planning, you're not only thinking about, what's the quantity and how it's going to be distributed and what's the trust structures, but it's also what are they going to do with the money? And are you going to communicate what you would like with the money in terms of their values? So they're more likely to find a hybrid to accomplish with it. Because you can guarantee that when money goes somewhere, it's going to be spent according to the way their value structure is, because that's how they're making decisions. So every perception, decision, and action they take is based on that value structure. So finding out what those values are and then using the Demartini method to dissolve the conflicts between those values, and then also a linking process, how specifically is what they're wanting to do with money, helping you fulfill what you're wanting to do with the money. and find a link between them so there's a respectful communication and a passover between them, because that's going to be involved in the decision making on the estate, what you're going to do and who you're going to allocate monies to. I have a case right now that I'm working with right now that there's a woman who is a very highly educated individual, highly responsible with money, and another brother who is the opposite, complementary opposites in the family, as you know. And so the father is basically saying, well, I want to allocate money to her because she's probably going to do something with it and be a good steward with it, and it's going to grow. If I give it to him, it's just going to disappear. But at the same time, that now creates a clash in the family. So you need to know how to communicate effectively what your intentions are in a way where their values are being met, or you end up with conflict. And this is you've seen a lot of wealthy families having conflicts as a result of the disbursement of money. So that's where the Demartini method comes in conflict resolution, communication, and also understanding and respecting that everybody has a different set of values. How do you communicate what you value in terms of their values? So there's some sort of a sustainable, fair exchange in the dissemination of the monies that are accumulated.
When I think about communication, the thought is kind of daunting, because even when I think throughout history, like there have been peoples who have had conflict for thousands of years and continue to have conflict today. And as was mentioned, even within a family, as Dr. John Demartini was saying, you have one sibling who spends, one who saves. Just the dynamics within a family are so complex. Sometimes you're more comfortable talking about money to your mother, but not your father. And then you have siblings who don't talk to each other. Getting back to Daniele, any tips on what's your advice on actually communicating well? And after you, maybe it goes back to Heather's background in psychology, that she can tackle some of these issues.
Yeah, I find it fascinating how, when you look throughout human history, so many of the people who are renowned for being incredible at doing what they do, being great leaders, being the emperor, being this and are not necessarily the same people who are good at passing those values on to their kids and to the next generation. Like, take a case in point. Think about somebody like Marcus Aurelius, the author of the Meditations, the renowned as one of the best emperors that Rome ever had. He does what he does. And, generally speaking, the assessment is that he was brilliant. The empire in his hand he couldn't have gone any better. And then he leaves the empire. So talk about legacy and wealth, right? He leaves a whole empire in the hands of his son, who's one of the absolutely worst emperors of Rome. And that's a lot of competition, because they had plenty of terrible emperors. So to be in the top 5, that means really trying. And so then you start wondering, okay, you wrote this philosophical book that's been passed down to the ages and people still read to this day. You clearly handle your business well. You handle the empire well. How much time and energy did you leave to educate your son? Something that's it's as important as it gets. Not only is important on a personal level, like I would imagine that would be high out on your priority, but also even purely if you're thinking about your duty. Marcus Aurelius is so big on the duty to empire and what he needs to do to govern well, do this and the other, and he does it. But then you invested so little time in educating the next generation that you hand it into the hands of a guy who screws up everything you have done in your whole life. And again, not a stranger, it's your son. But obviously, you haven't done the homework to relate to him as a human being, to treat, to do the things that are needed to raise a good human being. And that, unfortunately, is more common than one would expect. I mean, think about how many fields do you find somebody that who's amazing and you like them and you respect them, and you look at the next generation, their kids, or if they are lucky, maybe their grandkids, but usually not far removed from the original point, where you're like, what happened there? Where did things go wrong in that pattern? And really, that's where you go back to communication and where you invested your time and energy. You may have been the greatest manager in the world, the greatest emperor in the world, the greatest leader in the world in that sense. but it doesn't mean much if he's going to die with you, if you haven't been able to pass those values along. And of course, that's a whole other set of skills. That's probably why it's rare. Because they are the same people who are really good at doing one thing are not necessarily the most skilled naturally at doing this other aspect. And that's why I think things like what some of you guys are bringing up about the necessity for education, this is not something that happens automatically. It needs to be done through unless you're lucky enough that that's how you grow up and that's how you are told by your parents and grandparents. It's probably something that you need to develop. It's like a muscle, like anything else, that just doesn't happen because you're good at one thing. You're automatically going to be good at this. And you see this throughout history over and over and over again, almost unfailingly. Within 1 or 2 generations, whatever the values of somebody are completely gone.
Andy, I got a question. May I share a little story? If it's out of a line and you need to go to the next one. I was working in London, and a guy consulted with me, and he asked me, he had $3 billion. His father had about $28 billion. And his father gave up on him because he raised him without any responsibility and just kind of, just gave him things, something for nothing, and robbed him of dignity, accountability, responsibility, and productivity. And this young boy is basically received money without meaning, and money without meaning leads to debauchery instead of philanthropy. And so this guy comes to me and says, I'm angry at my father because he's not giving me the company. He's not passing the whole fortune to me. And I'm angry and bitter to him. He says, I need to know what do I need to get the business and the money. And I said, you really want to know that? I said, okay. I said, give all the money he's given you back. Give it all back. And go work at the company, start in the factory, and go work at the bottom level of the most mundane job and work your way up through every one of those jobs and work your way until you know everything about that company, until you know what they're experiencing and what's responsible for that. And work your way up every level of those things until you understand that company. And when he sees that you're willing to work and do something and be enough philanthropic, enough to have a service ethic, as the Book of Wealth by Hubert Ham Bancroft pointed out, when he sees that you've done that, he's probably going to see that my son is committed, he's ready, he's capable of doing it. You'll probably get the $28 billion in the company. I said, if not, you're going to be a little brat, a little boy that's never grown up and has been spoiled. That's why you don't ever want to rob people of dignity, accountability, responsibility, and productivity when you're passing on money. You want to make sure they have some accountabilities, or they're guaranteed to squander money. They're guaranteed to let their amygdala go for immediate gratification instead of long-term accumulation and vision and contribution.
Very, very valuable lessons. Thank you for that story. Let's move on to segment 4. Family legacy is not just a collection of heirlooms or a name. It's a living, breathing entity that shapes our core identity. This identity, steeped in shared practices and beliefs, becomes the compass guiding our financial choices. Imagine your family history as a treasure map. It's not just about X that marks the wealth. It's about the journey, the lessons learned, and the values upheld along the way. Understanding this history is not just nostalgic, it's instructive. It offers a lens to view past financial triumphs and pitfalls, serving as both a cautionary tale and a playbook for future generations. But it goes beyond mere dollars and cents. It delves into the ethical fabric that has woven your family's financial decisions, influencing not just your portfolio, but your societal footprint. So as you navigate the complex world of wealth management, remember, you're not just a steward of your family's financial assets, you're a guardian of its legacy. Your choices today are the history lessons for tomorrow's generation, a continuation of a narrative that defines not just your family, but its impact on the world. Heather, in your position, you actively capture family stories through interviews and legacy conferences. Can you talk about why understanding a family's history is so important?
Yeah, let me give like 2 examples of that. So for example, let's say that great wealth has been built from building a business that the family has created, and maybe that business has transcended over multiple generations. Well, the further that you get out from that origin, but people are still receiving, there's going to be a disconnect in terms of what it took to build that particular entity that created the wealth. So it's really important to not only capture the story around what it was that created the wealth for the family, but what it took to create it. And so often you're thinking about things like the hard work, the work ethic, the sacrifice that it took, makes it more real for those person now benefiting from the wealth generations later, so that they're not taking it for granted. But that can also be done on a smaller scale. Let's just say that you want to pass on, let's say, a education. Even telling those stories to the current generation. I also have teenagers about to go to college. And so I have this very strong value around education. And we've also saved very diligently to be able to support them to go to school without them having to take on student loans. So telling the story of how that education became an important value to me, why that was important in my family's history, and what I hope this child will do with this gift that they're being given with their education to be taken, to be paid for, again, helps people to not take it for granted and to be able to fully capitalize on that gift that they've been given. So it's really critical to understand where that value came from, what it took, and why it's so important.
Caleb, at Investopedia, I always find very clear explanations of financial terms and concepts. Are there any analytics that point to people's interest in being a steward of their family money?
Yeah, all the time. And we love looking at it because I think that's one of the things that, we have a lot of self-directed investors on Investopedia by definition. Some people work with advisors as well, but people are trying to get smart about money to make decisions. So we have an entire taxonomy of life stage planning and how to work with money along those life stages. And it's astonishing, not just to see the amount of traffic we get for that, but the path different people take through that. We know personal finance is personal. That's why we call it personal finance. But the path from one article to the next, the journey that they go on, we can map that. And we can tell just by looking at it where this person is in their life, actually where they live, what income general level they have, just by behavior. And it is fascinating to see that, like I said, from this article to that article, what they're ultimately getting at, because people come to us with a question, right? What's the best way to set up a revocable trust? What's the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable trust? Or questions like that. But it's the next question and the question after that that really tells the story of their educational journey through and into money, that you can tell where they are and what they're trying to do. So we're getting those questions a lot, but you can tell who's asking them and where they are and what they're trying to do. I find that totally fascinating. And there is a desire, especially in younger generations, to build generational wealth. There's a huge desire in underrepresented and underserved communities to build generational wealth. They never had it, but they know it's available. And so we see these big movements like you see at InvestFest and Earn Your Leisure and other places where there are tens of thousands of people coming to events to learn to build generational wealth. That's how they're sold. And then watching that in real time in an event and then seeing it happen online through the journeys through our site, completely fascinating and encouraging.
It's cool to have access to that tremendous wealth of analytics and data. Dr. John, you've appeared in documentaries like Oh My God. How do you think spirituality intersects with the concept of family legacy?
Well, it kind of goes back to something we said, or I said at the very beginning. There is anthropomorphic religious constructs that some people have confused with spirituality. And then there's being inspired by your life and doing something that's inspiring, that contributes to the world. And to me, it's not necessarily some anthropomorphic deity that you subordinate to. It's more about finding out the thing that you feel in your heart that is inspiring, that's a contribution that you want to contribute to the planet. And that's on different scales, at different levels, at different people, at different times. So when you're doing something that you really are inspired to do, whatever is highest on your value, that's most meaningful, that's most teleological, purposeful to you, you automatically are more likely to be in the executive center planning and pursuing and taking on the challenges that awaken creativity and innovation and do something that's meaningful, you're more likely to have fair exchange there. And that to me is when you're doing something that is not narcissistic at the expense of others, not altruistic at the expense of self to others, but to something that's truly sustainable, fair exchange. To me, that's spirituality at its finest. As doing something, because when I ask people go to the moment you've had the most meaningful, most fulfilling moments in your life, I guarantee you it's been consistently that when people are doing something that's sustainable contribution to other people that they feel remunerated for in perfect fair exchange with somebody that they've given a service to. I think that's an essential part of our spiritual quest, our fulfillment in life, the thing that's meaningful and our contribution to life. So I say spirit without matter is expressionless, matter without spirit is emotionless. And finances and spirituality are not separated. I wrote a book called How to Make One Hell of a Profit, Still Get to Heaven, as a spoof to talk about how spirituality and finances can be one and the same thing. And Hubert Howe Bancroft, in his book on the Book of Wealth, said that there were three things common to the wealthiest people in the world. They said that number one was that they had, by divine providence and human sovereignty, a calling to be of great, vast service to human beings and to do ever greater service to people. The second one is that they wanted to elevate the standards of human consciousness and human experience on the planet, the greatest opportunities. And the third one is to transcend the moral hypocrisies around money, that it's good or evil. It's simply a means of fair exchange and a means of measuring the ability to sustainably fair exchange and contribute to the planet. When you would transcend that and do those three things, we've had wealth, according to Hubert Howe Bancroft. And he had 6,700 years of summary on wealth building from his literature and his Pulitzer Prize winning books. So I'm a firm believer that spirituality and materiality can be one and the same thing. They don't have to be in any way separated. And many times we've been skewed by misinformation about that. And I believe that people can go out and do something extraordinary in their life and do something massively contributive, great fortunes, and make a great service and exemplify what's possible for a human being on the planet. In the very beginning of Crunk's book, he talked about wealth is basically an expression of the mastery of human consciousness.
Daniele, any thoughts?
I don't know. You expressed it so well that it's hard to follow up on that act. But no, honestly, I think I'm still processing where he went with it, because that was I like the concept where he was going of like not separating the two, of not thinking that the material and the spiritual are these two radically different dimensions or pitting one against the other. So I like the idea to begin with, and now I'm letting it sink a little more where he went with it.
John, can you repeat the name of that book?
Well, Hubert Howe Bancroft wrote a 10-volume set on the Book of Wealth. Many years ago, I was watching a television series called Biography in A&E. My wife and I were living in Trump Tower there on the 62nd floor, and we were watching this show. And they were doing a thing on Mr. Frick from the Frick Museum there in New York on Fifth Avenue. And every night at midnight when he was in New York, he would go and sit in his art gallery that he had, private art gallery. He had Whistlers and Picassos and stuff. And he would read this book, and it was called the Book of Wealth. And I said, I want to find that book, because anybody of that stature reading that book consistently, I want to read that book. And I love books, so I've read a lot of them. So I found that book, and I went to Barnes and Nobles and Borders. They go, well, they don't even have the book. They said, but here's a card of a book collector. So I go to this book collector, and I said, I'd like to get that book. He said, well, there's only 200 of them 250 that were published originally. It's in the hands of the wealthiest people on the planet. Most of them don't sell it, but if it ever comes on auction, I'll let you know. Well, you know how the synchronicities of life are. Your intentions manifest things. 2.5 weeks later, he calls me and says, there's a lady whose husband just died, and they're auctioning off the Book of Wealth. I said, get it, whatever it takes. Here's this American Express Centurion card. Just take care of it. About a few days later, I get a delivery, and it's this giant cart thing in with this 3 foot by 2 foot paper thing by a foot high book collection. It's a book. And I went, oh my God, I didn't know this was going to be this big. And it was 10 volumes. And in there was the wealthiest individuals over the last 6,007 years, and organizations and institutions that did the greatest contribution to wealth on the planet. The Hanging Walls of Babylon, the Great Pyramids of Giza, the China Wall, the most magnificent things that have ever been created by a visionary with wealth. And how they did it, what was the thinking behind it, what was the psychology, what was the dream, the vision, and the impact and the use of resources that built these things. And that's what this book is about. It's a 10-volume series. It's a fantastic book. It's not about how to buy and sell stock. It's not about the biggest tip on market. None of that. It's just the mindset of the masters of wealth building over 6,700 years. And I've got that still sitting in my office, and I've read it multiple times. I've got it literally on my computer. And it's just something to create a different mindset for people that really want to create legacies.
Cool.
You're going to have 4 more of us searching eBay now for this 10-volume set to surface. Let's wrap it up with segment 5. When it comes to wealth, the conversation often extends beyond the balance sheet to the realm of ethical responsibility. So what moral obligations do the wealthy have? Philanthropy is a direct route, donating to causes that resonate with your values. But there's more. Social responsibility means using your wealth to create positive community change, whether it's job creation or supporting education. Then comes ethical investing, a growing trend where your dollars back companies that align with your moral compass. But responsibility does not end there. Legacy planning ensures your ethical footprint lasts beyond your lifetime, affecting how you set up trusts and wills. And let's not forget the unique moral dilemmas the wealthy face, from tax planning to the ethics of accumulation. Ultimately, the responsibility of wealth isn't just about what you have, it's about how you use it to engage with society and drive positive change. Heather, I see ethical investing is growing in interest, and it is very much a growing trend. Lots of dollars have moved in that direction. How do you guide ultra high net worth families in aligning their investments with their values?
So we step back, and values become one of the first foundations that we talk about. So we guide families through conversations where we are just trying to draw out what each member of the family believes and what they value and why, and what that value means to them. And from there, we're able to find that commonality that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. So not, one of the resistance that families have to starting to get talking is, hey, I don't think we're going to get common agreement, or people think so differently. But I've never been in a family where we can't at least find one value that's in common. And so getting that dialogue happening, and then focusing in on the commonalities and building that foundation for impact from there, whether that be philanthropy, whether that be a really practical application in the community that they can use as a lever to make a greater impact. So values really are the foundation. I always like to say, just like asset allocation is the cornerstone of investing, values are the cornerstone of family legacy planning, and then they intersect to be able to create that estate planning.
Caleb, where do you see interest at Investopedia when it comes to ESG and ethical investing?
Yeah, well, ESG had a tough year just because of all the greenwashing, and it kind of got dragged a little bit there. But I think that there is a very strong desire for people to put their money where their hearts are, especially, I don't want to, age people, but younger generations. You see that over and over again. When we survey our readers, and we do it every 2 months, we're asking them that question. Do you believe in investing where your heart is? Do you believe in screening companies out or including them so you have a voice in voting in their shareholder proxies? And a lot of people want this, and they're looking for the right vehicles to do it. And I don't think, even though there's so many index funds, ETFs, mutual funds, individual stocks that promise to be that, I don't think we've landed on something that people universally agree on is the right vehicle to invest along with their sensibilities. It has to be customized. So I know in my portfolio with my advisor, my wife and I really do not want fossil fuels in our portfolio. It's complicated for them because they have a lot of indexes, but they use really good software to screen out for us the companies we don't want in there. And we're able to build the kind of portfolio we feel good about, and we feel good about making money with. So I think we're a classic example of that. But if you look even in the younger generations, it's something they want even more access to, and they want to understand it a little bit better.
Dr. John, I want to ask your opinion. What are the moral obligations of the wealthy, and how can they navigate these effectively?
Well, there's a law called the law of heuristic escalation in sociology that says that any human being that has a set of priorities will run into somebody who has the complete opposite set of values. Montaigne traveled over the world looking for a universal value system, and as Heather was just describing, it's not easy to find the common denominator because there's complementations of opposites in even families, let alone in societies. So what one person may consider great, another person may not. One's a pro-lifer, one's a pro-aborter, one's a pro-guns, one's anti-guns. So I say you have to transcend the moral hypocrisies that exist on the planet when you're trying to do and pick things, and know that you're going to be labeled by somebody, liked and disliked, supported and challenged. You're going to get the pairs of opposites. It's a philosophical standard thing. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, talked about the unity of opposites, and it still hasn't changed since. And that was 2,500 years ago. So you're not going to make and pick something that's not going to have somebody that's going to both like it and dislike it. And they're going to label it good or bad. And you have to transcend the labels and go and do something that's deeply meaningful. As Aristotle said, the excess and deficiencies has a golden mean between it. And finding the golden mean that's truly meaningful to you, and knowing you're going to be liked and disliked and labeled as a result of that, that's part of the process. So you have to do something that's truly meaningful to yourself and try your best to communicate that as effectively as possible in other people's values, so you have the less retaliation possible in the pursuit. But finding something that's deeply meaningful, that's really from the heart, is an essential component, because it's your fulfillment in life. You're working your life to do something that's meaningful. And as you know, when you're doing philanthropy, I did an article for Jet Set magazine on philanthropy, and I found some interesting stats on a lot of philanthropy. A lot of the money going to philanthropy is not actually being used for what people think. So it's wise to know exactly where those dollars are going when you give to something, so you're not hoodwinkled into thinking it and it's ending up going to a marketing arm or something. It's not actually getting the result. So make sure it does that, and make sure it doesn't rob people of dignity, responsibility, productivity, and and the things that make them be alive. Don't rob people of life by giving them money. Don't give them something for nothing and then rob them of their own dignity and their productivity and their responsibilities in life. Make sure it's something that's meaningful and that really helps people.
Well, I do want to mention Chuck Feeney, who just recently passed away. One of my favorite stories, because he owned one of the early duty-free shopping chains and became a billionaire, worked his way up from very modest means growing up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But he very quietly was donating to causes that were dear to him, and then made a goal or an objective to give away all of his money during his lifetime, and inspired Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others. He just passed away at 92 and successfully reached his goal. He had given away essentially all of his money just a few years ago. So just making a huge impact. Daniele, any final thoughts?
I think it's interesting to me how there are examples of several societies over time where people in a position of wealth and power made the mistake of thinking that their wealth and power could be disconnected by the health of the society they lived in. So the feeling was, hey, I'm still doing great. Stuff is fantastic for me. Maybe not even I'm doing great. I'm even improving my profits. And so what if the rest of society is going to hell? That's too bad for them, but that really doesn't affect me. Aside for the ethical implications of that line of thinking, even on a practical level, that's an illusion. Because, the illusion that you can have everything crumbling around you, that you can have communities crumbling around you, and that somehow that's not going to affect you. Maybe it's not going to affect you now, maybe it's not going to affect you in 10 years, but it is affecting something that you are part of. And as such, the notion that this idea of separation, that your wealth and well-being is completely disconnected by the wealth and well-being of the society at large, I think is reassuring, because of course you can do something about your own immediate circumstances, and it's much harder to affect society at large. but it's still based on an illusion that eventually the bill is going to come for that. And you've seen it over and over again, where certain modifications would be needed to fix some social problems. People in a position of power are really uninterested in doing so because it would cost them time, energy, and money that they don't feel like parting with. And one generations down the road, just to their kids' generation, that society implodes because some adjustments have not been made where they needed to be made. So I think, there's a way of thinking that some of this is about being altruistic. And sure, I mean, there's something nice about that, but also there's a level of enlightened selfishness about it. It's precisely because you want your stuff to continue. You recognize that it cannot continue unless conditions in the community surrounding you are sustainable. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Well, I want to thank our panelists this evening for a very valuable discussion, a very thought-provoking discussion. I think that we covered many important aspects of wealth and legacy, the importance of communication, the importance of family preparation, of establishing a plan, of educating yourself and your family members. And I love the idea of values as a cornerstone in legacy planning. So all great topics. Please visit our panelists. You can find more from Heather Winslow-Walker at Vanguard.com. Dr. John Demartini, who speaks like a guy who has read 30,000 books. You can find him at drdemartini.com. Thank you, Daniele Bolelli. He's at danielebolelli.com. And Caleb Silver, Investopedia.com. All great resources. Thank you very much once again to our panelists. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you're listening or watching at youtube.com, find us next week where we are going to be talking about, I don't have it in front of me, but I guarantee it will be a great show. It's on October 25th, 6 p.m. Eastern, episode 11. The title, I've got it. The Psychology of Spending, Understanding Your Money Habits. Until then, please do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.